The mute boy who slept in the hayloft drew a map on dirt. A Lakota chief followed it and found her. The first thing I noticed about the boy was his hands. Not his silence. Every man who came to the trading post that autumn knew the boy didn't speak. Tolliver, who ran the post, had explained it to anyone who asked and a few who didn't. The boy had come in off the Cimarron Flats 8 months prior, near starved, wearing boots 3 sizes too large and a shirt with someone else's dried blood on the collar. Didn't say a word when Tolliver took him in. Didn't say a word after. The doctor from Guthrie rode out once, pressed on his throat, looked in his ears, shrugged. Nothing broken that a doctor could find. Whatever had silenced the boy lived somewhere else. But his hands, that's what I saw. I was there to trade 3 good hides, a bundle of dried sage, 2 jars of rendered fat that a woman in the camp needed for a child's chest sickness. My horse needed a new shoe nail. The left rear shoe had loosened on the rocky crossing 2 days out. Tolliver was a fair man. We had done business for 11 years. The boy was sweeping near the stove. 8 years old, maybe 9. Hard to tell, he was thin in the way of children who had missed too many meals in too short a time, which makes age uncertain. He swept carefully. Not lazy circles the way a boy forced into chores will do. Careful, like the broom was telling him something about the floor and he was listening. His hands on the broom handle, that's what made me stop. The grip, the sureness of it. A man's hands don't lie about what they've done and what they know, even small ones. I finished my trading and I started for the door. The boy looked up. He didn't say anything because he never said anything, but he looked at me a long time, the broom still in both hands, and there was something behind his eyes that I did not look away from. He had seen something. Children who have seen terrible things carry it differently than children who have seen nothing. The ones who have seen nothing are frightened of the ordinary dark. The ones who have seen things look straight at you, past the surface of your face, reading for what's underneath. He was one of those. I nodded to him, he nodded back. I rode out. But I thought about those hands for 2 miles, the grip of them, the sureness. A man's hands tell his history, what he's done, what he's carried, what he couldn't put down. I had looked at hands all my life and read them the way you read tracks in mud. This man works with tools, this man doesn't. This man is afraid of something, this man is past being afraid. The boy's hands told me he had worked. He had carried things. He had made things, the kind of making that requires patience and attention and starting over when it goes wrong. And those hands had made the broom do its work. Even in a dirty floor of a trading post he had no stake in a life that was not yet his own. That too told me something. That was the first week of October. 2 weeks later, I came back to the trading post for tobacco. My uncle smoked a clay pipe in the evenings, and the tobacco we had was running short. Simple enough errand. The boy was outside, crouched in the dirt near the hitching post, doing nothing it seemed. I tied my horse and walked past him and he didn't look up. On my way back out, carrying the tobacco wrapped in brown paper, I looked down. He had drawn something in the dirt. I stopped. It was a map. I know maps. My father's father taught me to read the land, to see a valley from above in my mind even when I was standing in the middle of it, and what the boy had scratched in the dirt with a stick was a map. Not a child's scribble, a real rendering. The bend of the river, the way it kinked east before the canyon mouth. The canyon mouth itself, rough but right. A line of bluffs running southwest. And at the end of the line, marked with a small tight cross the size of a man's thumbnail, a place. I crouched down beside him. He didn't flinch. He looked at the map, then at me. I pointed to the cross. I said in Lakota, "What is there?" He couldn't answer. He knew I knew that, but he picked up his stick and drew something next to the cross. Small, took care. When he was done, I looked at it. A woman, the rough shape of a woman lying on her side, one arm out. The kind of shape a child draws when he wants you to understand something fast and is afraid there isn't time to be delicate about it. Then he looked at me again. I stayed crouched for a long moment. The wind came up off the flats and pushed some dust across the map, and the boy covered the cross with his hand, so it wouldn't blur. I asked him, "You saw her?" He nodded, one nod precise. I asked, "She's alive?" He held up his hand flat and tilted it one side to side. Maybe. He wasn't sure. What he knew he was sure of. What he didn't know, he told me honestly with that one gesture, rather than nodding yes just to make me feel better. I stood up. I looked south, in the direction the map indicated, which was the rough direction of the Cimarron Canyon country, the broken land below the bluffs, where the stone ran red in the afternoon, and the shadows filled the draws before dusk. I went inside and found Tolliver. I told him what the boy had drawn. Tolliver got a strange look, not disbelief, more the look of a man who had been carrying something heavy and had just been told there might be a place to set it down. He told me that 3 weeks prior, a woman named Clara Aldis had gone missing from the homestead 11 miles east. Her husband had been killed, found in the yard with a bullet in him, and she was gone. 2 of the men from Guthrie had gone out to look and come back empty. The marshal had sent word to Fort Supply. Nobody had found anything. I thought about the boy's map, the way he'd held his hand over the cross when the wind came. I told Tolliver I would ride out in the morning. He looked at me, then he said, "You do that." I didn't answer that. It wasn't a question that needed one. I went to the door and the boy was still outside, still crouched by his map. I walked to him and pointed at the cross again. I held up one finger and moved it in the arc of the sun across the sky. One day, tomorrow. He looked at me. His face did not change much, but something behind his eyes settled. A loosening. The way a knot goes when the right hand finds the right place in the rope. I rode back to camp. In camp that night I didn't sleep well. This was not unusual for me before a hard ride. My body went quiet but my mind stayed working, which was not anxiety. I was past the age where dread kept me up, more like a horse that is rested but still alert, ears moving in the dark. I lay in the dark and went over the boy's map in my mind. Every mark he'd made. The river bend, the canyon mouth, the bluff line, the cross. I have a good memory for land. I don't say this with pride. It was something I was born with, the way a man might be born with good eyes or a good ear for music. My uncle had it too. We could walk over a piece of ground once at a walk and carry the shape of it for years. This had been useful in many situations in my life. Not all of them I am proud of, but useful. I went over the canyon country in my mind the way you go over a thing you know, not searching, just letting it be there, letting the details surface on their own. The draws, the ruins. The way the bluff faced, which I was trying to remember exactly because it determined when the sun reached what was below it, which was relevant for how cold a night in that stone room would be. West-facing. The stone face would hold the afternoon heat and release it slowly through the night. Cold but survivable, if she had a blanket. I thought about that. Someone had thought to give her a blanket. I did not know what to make of that. It told me something about the men. What it told me I was not sure. I was still turning that over when I finally slept. I should tell you something about that canyon country. I had ridden through it many times over many years. Before the treaties changed things, before the land runs and the fence lines began cutting the plains into pieces, I had hunted elk in those draws, had camped beside that river in August when the water ran low and clear over the pink gravel. My father had shown me a place in the canyon wall where old people before us, had pressed their hands into the stone and left the shapes there, small hands, big hands, a child's hand beside a man's. And I had put my own hand over one of those shapes once and felt something I will not try to name. I knew that country. Not perfectly, it was broken land. Canyon country does not give itself up easily, but I knew it well enough. What I knew about the bluffs the boy had drawn. There were old homesteader ruins in the draws below them. Stone and sod, people who had come in the first rush and couldn't hold on. Some of those ruins were half standing still. Good shelter if a man wanted to keep someone somewhere and not be found. That's what I was thinking on the ride back to camp. Who would have killed a homesteader and taken his wife? It was not a simple answer. The territory in that year was full of men between things, men who had lost their land in one place and not found another, men who followed the cattle drives and stayed after the drives moved on, men running from courts in other states. Hard men who lived in the breaks and moved when they needed to. This was not a thing my people had done. I want to say that plainly. But it was the kind of thing that happened in that country in those years, and the kind of thing that required someone who knew the land well enough to hide in it. In camp, I spoke to two men I trusted. Runs Far, who was 15 years older than me and had forgotten more about tracking than most men would ever know, and my cousin Hinta, who was younger but steady, the kind of man whose horse never spooked and whose hands never trembled. I told them what the boy had shown me. Runs Far asked one question. How old was the woman's sign in the dirt when the boy drew it? I said I didn't know. The boy hadn't indicated. Runs Far said nothing for a while. Then he said, "We go." We left before first light. 3 riders moving south by southwest. The land was flat for the first hour, the grass winter brown and low, the sky beginning to purple at the edges before the sun came. My horse, a gray I had ridden for 6 years and trusted completely, moved well in the cold. She did not like the cold as much as I did. She was bred in warmer country, but she was honest about it, shortening her stride a little on the frozen patches rather than fighting through and risking a slip. I appreciated that in a horse. Honesty. We crossed the river at the shallow bend. The water was cold and black, running low. Hinta's horse balked for a moment at the far bank where the mud was soft and strange under its feet, and Hinta did not force it, just sat still, let the horse assess, and when the horse was ready they came across. No drama. Beyond the river the land began to rise and fold. The grass gave way to scrub, then to the broken stone country. The bluffs were ahead and to the south, catching the first long light in bands of red and orange. I had the boy's map in my head. The cross was at the base of the western bluff, in the draw behind the broken stone. I had thought about it all night, where exactly in that draw the ruins were, which ones were half standing, which direction they faced. There were 2 that I could place. One was a sod house whose roof had gone years ago, open to the sky, useless for shelter. The other was a stone and timber structure built against the bluff itself, 3 walls still standing, the cliff face serving as the 4th. That one held heat. That one had a door frame, though the door was long gone. That's where I was riding to. We went carefully through the scrub, not riding hard, riding quiet. The canyon country amplifies sound in strange ways, sends it around corners, carries a hoofbeat 3 draws over. I had learned this as a young man, that the canyons are not empty. They are full of sound, they hold it and move it around, and what you hear is never coming from where you think. My father had taught me to listen with my whole body in canyon country, not just my ears. Feel the vibration through the soles of your feet, he'd said, when you dismount. The stone remembers what's passed through it. I dismounted a full mile out, which was further than strictly necessary, because the gray's hooves on the stone made a particular sound that carried badly and I did not want to announce us. Hinta did the same without being told. Runs Far, who had spent more years in canyon country than either of us, had already dismounted. He had done it quietly, a half-mile back, and I had not seen him do it. He was simply suddenly on foot, as if he had always been. We moved through the scrub on foot, leading the horses. The light was still long and cold, but the shadows in the draw were building up from the bottom. Another hour and it would be difficult to see the ground clearly. I wanted to be done before that. We slowed to a walk a half-mile out and started reading the ground. Runs Far dropped back to watch our rear. Hinta came up on my left, a little behind. The draw was in shadow. The sun hadn't reached it yet. The stone structure was there, just as I remembered, built against the base of the bluff, 3 walls of red stone mortared rough, timber across the top where a roof had partly held. Dark inside. 2 horses tied to a scrub cedar 50 yards from the door. I put my hand up. We stopped. 2 horses, 2 men most likely, maybe 1 and a spare, no way to be certain. We read the ground around the horses from a distance. Both animals had been tied a good while. The ground under them was churned, droppings dry. They'd been here through the night at least, maybe 2 nights. A fire somewhere inside recently, a thread of smoke from the corner where the roof was lowest. Not much. Enough. I looked at Hinta. He looked at me. We had ridden together long enough that some things didn't need to be said. I dismounted, tied my horse to a piece of scrub further back. Hinta did the same. Runs Far stayed with the horses. Not because he was old. Runs Far could move through stone country without making a sound, and I have watched him do it, but because someone needed to watch the rear, and he was the right man for it. Hinta went wide left, moving through the base of the bluff where the stone gave him cover. I went straight. There was no other approach that made sense from the front. The canyon wall funneled you toward the door, so I didn't try to hide it. I walked toward the door frame. I want to be careful about what I tell you here, not because I'm ashamed of it, because words make things neat, and what happened was not neat. There were 2 men inside. One was awake and saw me coming and came out with a rifle. The other was asleep near the fire. The one with the rifle told me to stop. I stopped. He told me to go back where I came from. He used words I will not repeat here, words about what I was and what my kind did, words men used in those years when they wanted to make themselves feel larger by making you feel like less. I listened to all of it. Then I said plainly in English, "There is a woman here that belongs home. Give her to me and ride out." He told me what he'd do to me if I didn't turn around. From behind me and to the left I heard nothing, which was Hinta arriving where he needed to be. What happened next was fast, and I will not dwell on it. The man with the rifle made a choice, and Hinta took the rifle. The man by the fire woke up swinging, and I stopped him from doing much. Neither man was killed, though the one with the rifle would not use that arm the way he used to. They were tied and left, and I sent Hinta back for the horses while I went inside. She was in the back corner, in the darkest part of the structure. Tied at the wrists, a blanket around her shoulders. She had pressed herself as far into the corner as she could go, which was not far, and she was watching the door when I came through it. And when she saw me, she made a sound, not a word, just a sound, and went very still. I stopped. I crouched down so I was not looming. I said, "Your name is Clara Aldous. Tolliver at the trading post sent me. You are going home now." She was pale with cold, her hair matted, a bruise along her jaw that had gone yellow at the edges. She was frightened of me, of everything, of the sound my boots had made on the stone floor, probably of her own name spoken out loud after days of not hearing it. She held very still and looked at me. I did not rush her. I have learned in my life that when someone has been in the dark a long time, you do not drag them into the light. You wait near the edge of it. You let them come. After a moment she said, "Are you real?" I said, "Yes." She said, "They told me nobody was coming." I said they were wrong. She looked at my hands. They were in front of me, open, nothing in them, and then she looked at my face again. I held still. Then she held her wrists out to me, the rope. I took out my knife and cut it. Her wrists were raw underneath. I did not comment on this. I put my knife away and I waited while she worked the feeling back into her hands, pressing her palms together, rubbing her fingers. Then she stood up. She was unsteady and she caught the wall, and I put my hand out, not to take her arm, just to be there if she needed it. She looked at my hand for a moment. Then she took it. We brought her out into the morning. The sun had reached the draw by then, and the light was sharp and cold and very clean after the dark of the stone room. She stopped in the doorway and put her face up to it, the light. Not quite warm yet, but there, real, and closed her eyes for 3 or 4 seconds. Hinta had brought the horses around. He gave Clara his own horse without being asked. He would ride double with runs far, and he held the horse steady while she mounted. She was stiff and cold, and getting into the saddle took effort, but she did it without help after that first moment at the wall. We rode north. The two men were still tied in the stone room. I had pulled the horses away from the cedar and left them loose. They'd wander back eventually, find water. The men had enough give in the rope to free themselves if they worked at it, which would take time. Enough time. I wasn't running. I was riding at a pace Clara could hold, which wasn't fast. Her hands on the reins were still stiff, and she rode carefully, watching the ground, learning the horse under her. After the first hour, she started to talk. Not about what had happened. She talked about small things, the way the light hit the scrub, a hawk we passed, the color of the bluffs behind us. She was putting the world back together piece by naming what she saw. I recognized that. I had seen it before, in men after battles, in women after hard winters, in children after things I didn't want to remember. The naming is what brings the world back into solid shape after it has gone fluid and wrong. I listened. I didn't offer much. She wasn't talking to get a response. She was talking to hear her own voice still working. At one point she said, "Tolliver sent you." I said I knew where to look. She said, "How?" I thought about the boy, the broom in his careful hands, the map in the dirt, and how he'd covered the cross with his palm when the wind came. I said, "A boy at the trading post drew me a map." She was quiet for a moment, then the mute boy. I said, "Yes." She said, "He saw me. The morning he was in the field, I saw him watching from the tall grass." I didn't think. She stopped. I said, "He knew what to do with what he'd seen." She nodded. She rode quiet for a while, then she said, "What's his name?" I said, "I don't know. Tolliver calls him Boy." She shook her head slightly, not in judgment of Tolliver, more the small refusal of a thought she was filing away for later, like she was already planning to ask the boy himself, wondering if he'd answer, wondering how. We reached the trading post by mid-afternoon. Tolliver came out when he heard the horses and stopped in the yard with his hands at his sides, looking at Clara on Hinta's horse. He was not a man who showed much. His face did the thing it did when the heavy thing got set down. He said, "Mrs. Aldous." She said, "Mr. Tolliver." He came forward and helped her down from the horse. She was stiff enough that the dismount was difficult, and he steadied her without making anything of it, just a hand at her elbow, the way a man does when the thing that matters is not making the person feel watched. There were two women inside the post, a preacher's wife and another woman whose name I didn't know, and Tolliver had them come out. They took Clara inside. There was water heating on the stove already. Tolliver had believed or hoped or both. I stayed in the yard. Hinta and Runs Far were with the horses. The three of us didn't have much to say. It had been a long day in the cold, and the horses needed water, and there was a trough at the side of the post. We watered them and stood around in the way men stand after something is finished, not quite ready to move yet. The boy came out. He came through the front door and stopped on the step, looking at the yard. His eyes went to me first, then to Hinta and Runs Far, then past all of us to the door he'd just come through. I walked over to him. He looked up at me. He had that same precise attention, both hands at his sides, feet set, looking straight. I said, "You were right. She was there. She's inside." He held very still. A small muscle moved in his jaw. His hands at his sides curled once into fists and then opened again. I said, "You did a good thing. That map you drew was a good map." He looked down at his hands, then up at me. I said, "Where did you learn to draw like that?" He looked at me a long moment. Then he reached up slowly and touched the right side of his chest, just below the collarbone, not pointing at anything, just touching, the way a person touches a place that once held something. I didn't push it. Some things live in a place that's not made of words, and asking a boy without words to explain the wordless thing is a cruelty I had no interest in committing. I put my hand on his shoulder briefly, just a moment, then I took it away. He stood there on the step while I went back to the horses. Tolliver came out about 20 minutes later. He had a tin cup of coffee and he brought it to me without asking, which was the right thing to do. He stood beside me and we drank. He had a cup of his own and he looked at the yard. He said there'll be a reward. Her family back in Missouri, they put up a reward. I said I didn't need it. He said, I know you don't. I'll see it gets used right. I nodded. He said, word's going to get around, what you did. I looked at him. He said, I mean that as straight as I can say it. The marshal will hear. Guthrie will hear. People talk in this country. You rode out there and you came back with her and people are going to know whose doing it was. I thought about that. I thought about what it meant and what it didn't mean. It didn't change anything about the land or the treaties or the fence lines. Knowing one man's name did not move any walls, but a man's name, known for what it's worth, not feared, not disdained, known, that was not nothing. In that country in those years, that was not nothing. I said, the boy's name is worth knowing too. Tolliver looked at the post, through the wall somewhere. He said, I'll work on that. I came back to the trading post 6 days later. Ostensibly for tobacco again. My uncle's pipe habit was convenient. The boy was in the same spot near the hitching post, crouching in the dirt. Different stick. Different map this time, not a real place, I could see that immediately. A made-up place, a territory of his own design, with mountains that weren't quite like any mountains and a river with too many bends. An invented country. I crouched beside him and looked at it. He glanced at me sideways without stopping. I studied the invented country for a while. It was well made. Internally consistent. The river ran downhill. The mountains sat where mountains would sit if the terrain was what he said it was. It was a real place in its own logic. I said good country, in Lakota. He looked at me sharply, then his expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile. The version of a smile that lives in the eyes when a person has almost forgotten they still have one. Inside, Tolliver was at the counter. The preacher's wife was there buying flour. I got my tobacco. I heard Tolliver low while the woman was looking at the other shelf say to me, she asked about the boy, Mrs. Aldous, before she went. She asked his name. I said, does he have one? Tolliver said, the marshal ran the missing children reports back a year. There was a boy his age from a homestead up near the Beaver River. Parents killed in a raid, not Indian, before you, 2 men running from a warrant. Boy listed as missing, presumed. That was 8 months ago. I let that sit. Tolliver said, his name, if it's him, was Eli. I looked out the window at the boy crouching in the dirt. Eli. I said the name quietly, just to hear it. Tolliver said, I haven't told him yet, didn't know if. I said, tell him, a man's name is his. Tolliver nodded. I took my tobacco and went out. The boy, Eli, was still at his invented country. I crouched one more time. I said in English, which I didn't use often with him but wanted to now, your name is Eli. He stopped moving the stick. I said it again, just the name, Eli. He looked at the dirt. He looked at his country in the dirt, all those careful bends and ridges. Then he looked up at me. His mouth moved. Hardly anything. The smallest motion of the lips, tongue touching the ridge behind his teeth, the shape of a word that had no sound behind it yet. But it was his name. He was making the shape of it, privately, for himself, the way you do when a thing returns to you that you thought was gone. I stood up. I said, good map, Eli. And I walked to my horse and rode north. I need to say something about the 2 weeks between. The marshal from Guthrie came out 4 days after. Tolliver had sent word, and the marshal, A tall man named Creed who wore his hat low and spoke carefully, the way men do when they've learned that careless words in their line of work cost people, rode out to the stone room in the canyon with 2 deputies and came back with the men. He asked me questions. I answered them. He wrote things in a small notebook with a short pencil, and when he was done he looked at the notebook and then at me. He said, "I want to be straight with you." I said, "Then be straight." He said, "There are men in this territory who will say what you did was a trespass. They'll say the law was the law's business, and you had no standing to ride out into that canyon country and do what you did." I looked at him. He said, "I am not one of those men. But I want you to know you may hear from them." I said, "Men have been saying things about my standing for 30 years. I have yet to require their permission to do what needed doing." Creed looked at me for a moment. Then something shifted in his face, not a smile exactly, but the place a smile comes from. He said, "Fair enough." He put his notebook away. He said, "For what it's worth, Mrs. Aldous is alive because you rode out there, and that is the fact of the matter, and I will say so to anyone who asks me." He rode back to Guthrie. I thought about that, about the usefulness of a man like Creed, not powerful, not loud, just a man who said the true thing to the people who needed to hear it. That kind of man did more work in the world than most people gave him credit for. Word did get around, as Tolliver had said it would. I heard it from Run's Far first. He had been to the settlement at Council Grove, and people there had spoken of it, spoken of me by name and correctly. Then Hinta heard it from his wife's cousin who traded in Guthrie. Then a man at a cattle crossing who had no reason to know me looked at me and said, "You're the chief who brought the woman back from the canyon," and I said yes, and he shook my hand the way men shake hands when they mean it. It was not a large thing. The world did not rearrange itself, but a man's name, known for what he actually did, that mattered. It settled something, not in my chest exactly, more in the ground under me. The way a good fence post settles when you've driven it right, and you put your hand on the top of it, and it doesn't move. I had been steady. The world had noticed I was steady. That is enough. That has always been enough. 3 weeks after that, Clara Aldous came to the trading post. I was there by chance, the shoe-nail business again. My horse seemed determined to keep bringing me back, and I was at the trough with my gray when a wagon came in from the east. She was driving it herself, a dark green wagon with a canvas top, one sorrel horse in the traces, moving at a working trot. She handled it well, short hands on the reins, not fighting the horse, letting the pace be the horse's pace and managing the direction herself. Someone who had driven wagons all her life. She stopped in the yard and climbed down without help, and looked around the post with the practiced eye of a woman who has a list in her head and is locating things against it. Then she saw me. She came across the yard. She was wearing a brown coat I hadn't seen before, and her hair was pinned back neatly and the bruise on her jaw was gone. She looked, in the pale winter light, like a woman who had put herself back together, not the same as before, you never come back the same, but solid. Herself. She stopped in front of me. She said, "I was hoping I'd see you." I said nothing, waited. She said, "I wanted to thank you, properly. I wasn't, when you brought me out of that place, I wasn't in a condition to do it right." I said, "You don't owe me anything." She said, "I know I don't owe you. That's not why I'm doing it." She looked at me with a directness I appreciated. Some people, when they talk to you, are looking at the surface of your face, checking it the way you check a door to see if it'll hold. She wasn't doing that. She was looking at me the way the boy did, past the surface, reading what was there. She said, "My husband is dead. I'm not going to pretend that isn't what it is. It is what it is, and I'm living with it. My family wants me to come back to Missouri, but I'm not going to do that either. This is my land, his land and mine, and now mine. I'm staying." I said, "That's a hard thing alone." She said, "Yes, it is." Pause. She said, "Tolliver told me what you said, about the boy. I said Eli. She said Eli. She said it the way I had, just the name weighing it. She said I spoke with him this morning. He's been here when I've come by. She paused, working out a way of talking. He draws and I talk. It goes. I said he's smart. She said very. She looked at her hands briefly, then back up. She said, I told him I'd take him, if he wanted, out to the homestead. I've got enough to manage with, God knows, but he could have a room. Work that suits his hands. Go to school in Guthrie come spring. Something in my chest moved. Not a big thing. A small shift, like a stone that's been sitting in one position a long time, settling into a better one. I said, what did he say? She said he drew a picture of a house with smoke coming out of the chimney, and a person next to it. Small person. I said, that's a yes. She said, that's what I thought too. She looked at me. The winter light was flat and even and made everything clear, no shadows to hide in, no softness to blur the edges. She was clear in it. I was clear in it. She said, I want you to know, and I'm saying this plainly because I don't know another way to say it, what you did was not a small thing. Not to me. There are men in this territory, white men, who would not have ridden out, who would have heard what that boy drew in the dirt and figured it was not their business. You didn't do that. I said I knew where to look. She said, that's not why you went. I didn't answer that, because she was right and there wasn't anything to add to it. She reached out and put her hand on my arm, just for a moment. Her hand was cold from the ride in the wagon and strong, the grip of a woman who worked hard ground every day. She looked at me while she did it, not past me, not at the middle distance. At me. She said, thank you, Makachente Chilla. I went still. I said, who told you that name? She said, Tolliver. He said it was what your people called you. I asked him how to say it. I practiced. Makachente Chilla. It means, in my language, a man who loves the earth. It was not the name I used in trading. That was a shorter English approximation that moved easier between languages. It was my real name, the one given to me when I was 7 years old by my father's uncle, who said I had the kind of attention to land that deserved to be named. She had asked for it, she had practiced it. I looked at her hand on my arm, her cold, strong hand. I said, you said it right. She let go. She stepped back. She gave me a small nod, the kind of nod that is not dismissal but completion, the end of a thing said that needed saying. Then she went into the trading post. I rode home that evening through the flattest part of the plains, where you can see the sky in all directions and the horizon is a perfect unbroken line. The gray moved well under me, warmed up now from the day's riding, finding her pace. The cold was settling in again as the sun dropped, the grass going silver in it. I thought about the canyon country, the map in the dirt. I thought about Eli in his hayloft, sleeping on straw in oversized boots, carrying what he'd seen in the Beaver River country without anyone to give it to. 8 months of it. And then one October morning, a man he'd never spoken to crouched beside him in the dirt, and he drew the only true thing he had. I thought about what it costs to trust someone with the one true thing you're carrying, when you have no words, when the last time you tried to show someone what you knew, it ended in a boy running alone across the flats in someone else's boots. He had looked at me, and he had trusted, and he had drawn the map. I had not wasted it. That, I thought, is what a man is supposed to do with what's given to him. The sun went below the horizon, and the sky turned colors that I do not have English words for, the particular blue-green at the horizon's edge just after the red fades, the purple above it, the first stars coming through. My father's uncle had a word for that sky. I had not heard it in 20 years, and it came back to me, riding, the way things do when you stop chasing them. I said it aloud to no one. The gray flicked an ear back at my voice and kept walking. I saw Clara Aldous twice more that winter. Once at the trading post in January, where we exchanged a few words over the counter while Tolliver filled her order. She looked well. The winter coat was a heavier one now, dark wool, the kind of coat a woman buys when she has decided she is going to be in a cold place for the long run and intends to be warm in it. Her face had color, not just cold color, actual health, the kind that comes from working outdoors. She said Eli was settled, was drawing maps of the homestead and the surrounding land, incredibly detailed maps, she said, that she'd been using to plan the spring planting and the fence lines. The boy had mapped the whole property inside of 2 weeks, including places she hadn't been herself. A dry creek bed on the northeast corner that only she and now Eli knew about. A place where the soil changed from clay to loam. Eli had noticed it by the color and texture of the ground, and marked it with a different symbol on his map, which had turned out to matter for what she was planning to put in that corner. I said, "That doesn't surprise me." She said, "It's starting to feel like I brought home a surveyor." There was something in her voice when she said it that I hadn't heard before. Light. Under the solid weight of everything she was carrying, the land, the grief, the winter, the boy, something lighter moving through it. Not as though the weight was less. More as though she had found a better way to distribute it, and the lightness was what you feel when weight is distributed right, not ease, but balance. She told me Eli had started writing. Not speaking, writing. Clara had given him a slate and chalk schoolroom style, and after 2 weeks of looking at it, he had begun using it. Single words at first, then short sentences. Functional things: this fence post is loose, the north water barrel has a crack, the bay horse favors her left front on frozen ground. Practical, specific, accurate. The language of a person who sees clearly and wants the information to travel. I said, "That's good." She said, "He's been writing my late husband's name on the slate, then wiping it off. He does it in the evenings sometimes when he thinks I'm not watching." I said nothing. She said, "I think he's working something out, what to do with what he saw back on the Beaver River, how to carry it." I thought about the boy in the field, watching through the tall grass, while the men took Clara from the yard. Watching and not being able to do anything but remember the shape of the land and trust that eventually the right person would crouch down beside him and look. I said, "He'll find his way with it. Children who have seen hard things and survived them, they're tougher than they look on the inside." She said, "I believe that." She looked at me, she said, "You should come out and see the place sometime, when the roads are better." I said I would think about it. She nodded, she collected her order, she drove her wagon out. The second time was in March. The roads were better, I had thought about it. I rode out to the homestead on a Tuesday in the second week of March, when the ground was beginning to soften, and the first green was showing in the low spots where the water collected. The sky was high and blue, and the wind had some actual warmth in it for the first time since October. The homestead was a quarter-mile off the main track, sitting in a gentle bowl of land that kept the north wind off it in winter. A good place, picked well. The stone house was solid, smaller than I'd imagined, 2 rooms, a porch on the south side, and there was a barn in better shape than many I'd seen, and a garden plot to the east of the house with the winter's dead stalks still in it. Eli was on the porch. He saw me coming from a long way off, and he watched me ride in without moving. When I stopped in front of the house and dismounted, he stood up from the step. He had grown, or looked like it, maybe just filled out a little. He was wearing boots that fit. His hair was cut and neat. He looked at me the way he always looked at me, past the surface, reading. I said, "Good morning, Eli." He nodded, one nod precise. Then he pointed at me and made a gesture with his hands, a gesture I didn't know. Then he pointed at the house. I looked at the house. Clara was in the doorway. She had come out when she heard the horse, or maybe she'd been watching from the window. She was wearing a blue dress and a work apron over it, and her hair was loose. The first time I'd seen it that way, without the pins and the March light, the new light was on her face. She said, "You came." I said, "Roads are better." She looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she said, "Come inside, there's coffee." And there was. We sat at a plain wooden table, Clara, Eli, and me, and drank coffee while the sun moved across the window. Eli had maps spread on one end of the table. Real maps now, done in ink, on whatever paper Clara could get from Guthrie. He showed me the property map, all 4 quadrants, with elevations marked by a system of his own devising, a language without words but clear. I looked at it for a long time. I pointed to the northwest corner of the property, where his elevation marks showed a rise. I said, "Good view from there." He nodded. Then he drew quickly in the margin of the map, a sight line, a horizon, and small marks along it. What you'd see from that rise. He'd been up there. I said, "Southeast, second mesa from the left. You can see the river." He stopped drawing, looked at me, then looked at his own margin drawing. He hadn't gone far enough to see the river. Something in his face, not exactly surprise, more like the pleasure of a thing extending further than you thought it went. Clara refilled my cup without being asked. She sat back down across from me and I talked while Eli worked on his maps. We talked the way people talk when they are past needing to perform for each other, about the land, the spring, what she planned to put in the garden, a sick horse she was worried about, a water question on the east fence line. Real things, the weight of them honest between us. At some point, she said, "The marshal came by last week, about the 2 men." I said, "And?" She said, "They're being held in Guthrie, trial next month. He wanted to know if I'd testify." I said, "Will you?" She looked at the table, then up. She said, "Yes." She said it quietly, but she said it whole. No waver in it. She'd already decided, had probably decided weeks ago, and saying it out loud was just the last stone of a wall already built. I said, "Good." She said, "You may be called as well." I said, "I know. I'll come." She looked at me. She said, "I didn't doubt that." The sun was getting low by then. I'd been there 3 hours and hadn't noticed the time going. I stood up to leave. Eli looked up from his maps. I put my hand briefly on his shoulder as I had done before, and he held still under it for a moment and then nodded. Clara walked me to the door. On the porch, with the evening light coming red across the bowl of the land and the first birds starting up in the scrub, she looked out at the property. She said, "Every time I think I can't manage it, something shifts. It always shifts back to manageable." I said, "You're a good manager of hard things." She turned and looked at me, not at the land anymore, at me. She said, "So are you." She put her hand out, not the way you shake hands, not with that formality, just her hand open toward me, offered. I took it. Her hand was warm now, spring having reached even her hands. We stood like that for a moment, her hand in mine on that porch with the red light and the birds and the whole valley going quiet around us. She said nothing, I said nothing. Some things don't need the addition of words. She let go. I stood there on the porch for a moment after she did, looking at the yard, the barn, the garden plot with its dead stalks, and the first green just beginning to push through at the edges where the soil was warmest. A robin somewhere in the scrub to the north. The smell of coffee still faintly on the air through the open door. A homestead, just a homestead. But a homestead is not a small thing when you understand what it costs to hold one. The work and the grief and the persistence of it. The decision to stay, made over and over, every morning when you get out of bed into the cold and face what the day requires. She was staying. She had decided, and she would not undecide it. I looked at the garden plot again, the green coming through at the edges. I thought, she'll have that in good order by June. I stepped off the porch. I mounted. I rode out of the bowl of land and up onto the flat, and I stopped once on the rise and looked back. The light was still on the house. Clara was still on the porch, her hand on the rail looking out, not at me, at the land, at all of it, at what was hers. Eli appeared in the doorway behind her, one of his maps in his hand. He looked out too. The two of them, standing in the last of the day's light. A woman who had come back from the dark and planted herself in the ground she'd chosen. A boy who had drawn one true map in the dirt and given it to a man he trusted, and gotten his name back in return. And me on the rise looking. This is what a man carries, I thought. Not just the weight of things, but also this. The moments that cost him nothing and give him everything. A mute boy's trust. A woman's hand in his on a porch. A name said right by someone who asked how to say it. I turned the gray north and rode home under the first cold stars. The grass was coming back. You could smell it, new green under the old brown, working its way up through the cold ground into the air. The gray smelled it too and picked up her pace a little, glad of it. I thought about the name she had learned, Makachantech Hilla. She had asked Tolliver for it, practiced it, carried it out to the homestead in her mouth all that morning, and said it right when the moment came. No one had done that before. Not in the English world anyway. White men called me by the approximation, the one that fit their mouths easier, and I had let it stand because it was not a battle worth fighting, and because my real name lived in my own language and did not require them to carry it. It was mine regardless. But she had asked for the real one. There is a thing that happens when someone sees you as you are, not as what they expected to find, not as a shape that fits the space they've already made, but actually sees what is there. Most people never do it, because seeing what's actually there requires you to let go of what you were planning to see, and that is harder than it sounds. She had done it. My father's uncle, who had given me my name, was a man who had seen everything the last 40 years had brought to our people and had not gone bitter from it. I had asked him once, I was young, maybe 20, how he stayed unbroken. He looked at me for a long time. He said, I pay attention to what is real, not what was promised, not what was taken. What is real right now in front of me? The land is real. The people are real. A good act is real, he said. Grief is real too. I'm not telling you not to grieve. I'm telling you not to mistake the grief for the whole of the world. The world is larger than what has been lost. I had not fully understood it then. Riding north under the cold March stars with the smell of new grass rising around me, I understood it better. The world was large. In it, a boy with a surveyor's eye sleeping safe in a house with a chimney. A woman on a porch with her hand on the rail looking at land she had chosen. A gray horse glad of the new grass picking up her pace in the dark. A man's name said right by someone who had asked how. These things were real. I let the gray have her pace and we moved through the dark together, the stars getting brighter as the sky deepened, the plains opening wide around us in every direction. And I felt, the way you feel it in your chest when it is true, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, carrying exactly what I was supposed to carry, and that the weight of it was right. A man knows that feeling when it comes. I let her,